strategic agility. Please hold tight for just a minute as other audience members get a chance to gather and tune in. Welcome everyone to the Insight webinar on boosting your company's strategic agility. This is Evan Schwartz. I'm your moderator and director of storytelling at Insight. I'm pleased to introduce our presenter, Scott Anthony, who is here today in our Boston headquarters. Scott is Insight's managing partner. He's based in our Asia Pacific offices, and he's the author of several books from Harvard Business Review Press. He will draw some lessons today from his most recent book, The First Mile, a launch manual for getting great ideas into the market. We want to hear from you, so we'll be taking breaks to pose interactive polls and to answer your questions. Just type your question in the dialog box located in the upper right corner of your screen, right there in the control panel. No need to or raise your hand by clicking the button. Just type it right in. Feel free to put your personal perspective into your question or your company perspective. I'll be collecting them and posing them to Scott. And so now I turn it over to Scott Anthony.
Thank you very much, Evan. And depending where on the world our audience is, good afternoon, good morning, or good evening. As Evan said, I usually find myself out in Singapore. I'm happy today to be on the East Coast of the United States, where it has just turned a little past noon rather than a little past midnight. So here's the way things are going to work over the course of the next 55 minutes or so. We are going to try to make this as interactive as we can. I'm going to share a little bit of the core content from the first mile, just so we've got a common language. We'll then pause after about 20 minutes or so for some questions. We then have 4 specific topics that we could double click on related to how you can boost your company's strategic agility. I'll let you, the audience, pick which couple topics you're most passionate about. Go into those topics, have another Q&A break, and then call it a webinar. First, just so you know who you're talking to, I think most of you who have joined know who Insight is. For those who don't, we are a consulting company that specializes in helping leaders turn uncertainty into opportunity. And we do this by helping people create growth strategies, build capabilities, and accelerate new growth ideas. I'm going to primarily today focus on the new growth acceleration and a little bit of the capability side as we go through today's discussion. And as Evan said, we're going to start by drawing on some of the content in my most recent book, The First Mile. Now, Insight as an organization has spent substantial time in the last 15 years truly living in the first mile of innovation. We have advised large companies as they've gone and launched new businesses, taking that precious reality of the marketplace. We've incubated and invested in dozens of companies. Of course, we built our own business as well. During the course of this time, I have seen hundreds, if not thousands, of ideas. And one of the core lessons I've learned through this time is that every idea is the same, because every idea to innovate is partially right and partially wrong. The trick that you face when you are staring at that first mile of innovation is that you don't know which part is which. Now often, particularly when we're inside large companies, we try to solve this problem through analysis. We go and do research, and we run focus groups, and we talk to experts, and we do financial forecasts. We get everyone in our organization aligned behind our plan, and then we go to execute. We recognize when we do this that we cannot discover truth this way. We learn the life lesson taught by the great American philosopher, actor, and occasional boxer Mike Tyson, who once said, everybody has a plan until they get punched in the face. The punch the innovator receives is the plan that looks so good on paper turned out to be resting on some shaky assumptions. I want to share with you now a couple of the most common punches you'll receive in innovation's first mile and make it real by describing punches that we as an organization have taken as we sought to create our own businesses. What you see pictured on the screen here is a hospital that is near and dear to my heart. This is Gleneagles Hospital in Singapore. It's about a half-mile from where I live. The reason why this is near and dear to my heart is because in 2011, this is where my third child, my son Harry, was born. You see him pictured on the screen here with my lovely wife, Joanne. When you step into Gleneagles or any hospital in Singapore, you see a truly first-rate experience. The doctors have gone to the best schools in the world. You've got some of the best medical instruments in the world, yet Singapore is able to do something that is borderline miraculous. They spend less per capita than almost any country in the world on healthcare, and they get better health outcomes. The United States, sadly, is the inverse of this situation. In the US, we spend more per capita than any country in the world, but we don't get better outcomes. So an idea clicked in our mind about a decade ago: medical tourism between the United States and Singapore. We find people in the United States who are going to undergo an elective procedure. We'd fly them out to Singapore. We'd have them go to Gleneagles, have the procedure performed, put them up in a 6-star hotel to recuperate, have a nice vacation, send them back a couple weeks later, all the while saving them and their insurance company thousands, if not tens of thousands of dollars. The customers we talked to said they loved the idea. The benefits managers loved it even more. We raised about $500,000. We began innovations first month. People lie. They lie all the time, not because they're trying to deceive you, but because we don't do a particularly accurate job of forecasting what we're going to do in the face of uncertainty. In this case, the customers who told us they were interested actually weren't. Here's how we learned it. We started running seminars in places that we knew were teeming with retirement communities in Florida to get our first honest-to-goodness paying customer. Nobody showed up. Once they were faced with the real prospect of getting in a thin metal tube and flying 8,000 miles to a country that, honestly, most of them had never heard of before, all of a sudden the interest disappeared. Great innovators recognize it. They listen to what people say, but they watch more carefully what they do. And as quickly as possible, they get into a real transactional environment so they can learn through experience. That's one punishing punch that you take in innovation's first mile. Here's another one. I'm going to go from Singapore to India. Our idea here was to disrupt the laundry services market in India. The rich in India have this problem. They've got great washing machines, great dryers, they have tons of household help. The laundry problem is solved. Everybody else has a very affordable solution where they outsource washing to the village dhobi. The dhobi comes, picks up the clothes, brings it to a communal pool, washes them, uses harsh chemicals, beats them against rocks, and brings them back. Maybe 10 days later. It only costs about 20 rupees, or about 33 cents per kilogram of clothing, so it's affordable, but the quality isn't all that great. We thought we would come in between these extremes. You see the kiosk picture here. Village Laundry Service was the name of the business. We would put in a modern washing machine, a modern dryer. We'd use the best detergents in the world. We'd have specially trained staff. We'd have 24-hour turnaround. Yeah, we charge more than the dhobi, but you're getting so much more for your money. Everybody loved the idea. We raced to commercialize one at our peak, having about 30 kiosks across Mumbai, Mysore, and Bangalore. We were named one of India's hottest startups. One of the reasons why people were so excited about the idea was the pristine beauty of the financial forecast, the spreadsheets we created that showed how easy it was going to be to make money using this, how we'd spread this idea all throughout India, all throughout the other emerging markets, and make tons of money. People lie and spreadsheets deceive. The beautiful spreadsheets were hiding an uncomfortable reality. This was a bad idea. We can never charge enough, even as we push prices up for a kilogram of laundry, to cover the basic operating costs of delivering that service. If you can't make the unit economics a single transaction work, there's no amount of volume that you can do to cover that up. In retrospect, the challenge that we had with this business was that we raised too much money. We were so busy as we tried to rapidly expand the business, fighting fires, literally. one of the kiosks caught on fire, that we weren't able to figure out that something was fundamentally wrong. Well, finally we recognized it, we scrapped the kiosk model, we now run a central store, and we live to fight another day, but it took us much longer to get there. Recognize whenever you're in the first mile of innovation, your spreadsheets, your forecasts are nothing more than the mathematical relationship between largely made up numbers. As the great Scott Cook, the founder and still active chairman of Intuit, once said, for every one of our failures, we had spreadsheets that looked awesome. The first mile is an exhilarating place, but it is a perilous place as well. People lie. Spreadsheets so attractive are illusions. You're never going to reach them, and even if you do, I promise it will take you longer than you think, and it will cost more than you expect. So what do you do in the face of this? What I want to do is give you the two key acronyms that are in the first mile that describe how you can overcome some of the basic challenges. Then we'll talk about it a little bit as a group, and then we'll deep dive into a couple specific topics. The two acronyms I want you to remember are depth and hope. Let me walk through each of those. Depth, the first acronym, and the core process described in the first mile. The D stands for document. Before your time to clearly spell out what it is you are trying to do. This doesn't mean writing a PhD thesis. Nobody cares. Nobody wants that level of detail. But it means thinking thoroughly about your idea. Who's the customer? How will you reach them? Who are the suppliers? How will everything work together? The time taken to document pays big dividends later on because it helps you begin to surface the most critical thing to find in innovation's first mile, those assumptions that are lurking behind your idea. The E stands for evaluate. Here the idea is to pick up your idea and to look at it from as many different angles as possible. You're not trying to figure out if the idea is right or wrong. You can't ever be sure about that. What you're trying to do is separate facts from unknown, certainty from assumptions. If you're really working on something innovative, the truth is you know a little and you're assuming a lot. Then the next thing you do is the act and figure out what are the biggest weaknesses, what are the biggest uncertainties behind your idea. At this stage, we like to use the little table that's appeared on your screen, the first mile certainty table. I told you every idea was the same because it's partially right and partially wrong. Every successful idea is the same as well because it meets three conditions. It delivers against it, it targets a need, it delivers against that need, and the numbers work. This table is the simplest way that we found to build confidence about how certain you can be that you pass each of those three tests. Let me walk through it quickly. Is there a need? If a customer says there is a need, you should have almost no confidence. Remember, people lie. If a customer shows you with how they're spending their time or money today there's a need, you feel better. If they've actually used your idea, you're close to a tipping point. If they paid money for it, you're getting close more than once, you're almost there, they're telling their friends about it, then you could be confident. Can you deliver? Everything starts with a dream. Dreams are great. Don't invest billions of dollars behind them. Try to find ways to make that dream progressively more tangible, recognizing only when you deliver at scale can you be confident that you can do it. Is it worth it? Spreadsheets are mathematical relationships between made-up numbers. There's value in coming up with those spreadsheets because you learn about your hypotheses until you've actually figured out how to turn that revenue into profits, until you actually have delivered profits. You can't be sure that the numbers are going to work. Once you use this technique to figure out the area where you're least certain, you the most important part of the process, the T, test, where you test rigorously and adapt quickly. Here's when you have to embrace the patron saint of the first mile, MacGyver. For those of you who don't remember him, he was the star of the eponymous show from 1985 to 1992, famous for getting out of any circumstance materials that were sitting in front of it. So the bomb on his shoulder here was probably created using materials that are on the desk that you're looking at right now. You want to embrace your inner MacGyver. Remember, every idea is partially right and partially wrong. You want to find out as quickly as you can, as efficiently as you can, what's right and what's wrong about your idea. Let me explain this a little bit further via a metaphor. You go back about 120 years ago, and everybody was trying to figure out, how can we build a machine that will allow a human being to fly? People were obsessed with it. This is the way most people tried to solve the problem. If you have read the Lean Startup or related work, they went and built a minimum viable product that solved the problem without all the back-end systems and bells and whistles. And then they tried it out. They went up to the top of a building and jumped or tried to have their plane fly. These all crashed. The problem when you follow this approach and the plane crashes is you spend a lot of time, you spend a lot of money, and you might have, in this case, seriously injured yourself. Bicycle mechanics, the Wright brothers, ultimately solved this problem. They approached it fundamentally differently. Yes, of course, they ultimately flew a plane, but before they flew a plane, they flew a kite. And to optimize that kite, they built a wind tunnel. Imagine how it felt in 1901 when you come up with that wind tunnel. In 2 months, you run 200 different experiments testing 38 different types of wing designs. You figure out the data that everyone is basing their assumptions on is flat out wrong. Think for your own idea. What is your wind tunnel? What is the thought experiment you can run? What's the really quick probing experiment you can run that allows you to learn more about your critical assumption? Then think about how you can go and build a kite. One of the great things about flying a kite is when it crashes, nobody gets hurt. You have a very quick way to pick yourself up, pick the kite up, and go and try it again. Embrace the metaphor, embrace your inner MacGyver, and you can speed through innovation's first mile. Now, this shouldn't be and doesn't need to be random. The next acronym, HOPE, helps bring discipline to the process of managing the uncertainty that always comes along with innovation. I'll explain this one using one of my favorite case studies. The thing that's pictured on your screen here is the USS Nautilus, the world's first nuclear-powered submarine. This is an amazing feat. Launched in 1954, just 5 years after the idea of nuclear propulsion was formulated. The program has been in existence for 60 years without a major technological incident. Why is that? At least one reason Steve Spear argued in his very good book, The High Velocity Edge, is the discipline that Admiral Rickover, the founder of the program, brought to all of the scientific uncertainty behind it. I would like to suggest by analogy, you can bring the same discipline to the uncertainty that will be behind your big disruptive idea. Whenever you experiment, whenever you innovate, whenever you're at innovation's first mile, you never can know for sure. So embrace the scientific method. Like a good scientist, start with a hypothesis, what you expect to happen. Then go and design and execute an experiment. Make sure that experiment has clear objectives, what you hope to learn. Without fail, make a prediction, even if you have no idea. In the case of the nuclear submarine program, Rickover told the scientists, the metal shielding you're putting around the radioactive core, tell me, where will it fatigue the most? Nobody had a clue. The science was too new for people to understand it. But by making a prediction and then executing in a way where you can test, measure, and validate that prediction, in this case putting sensors in the metal, even if you're absolutely wrong, you've created an opportunity to learn. So there it is. There's the core of the first mile. Every idea is partially right and partially wrong. You cannot get to truth purely through analysis. You have to be deft, document, evaluate, focus, and test, and have hope, hypothesis, objective, prediction, and execution plan. In just a few minutes, we're going to double click on a few topics related to strategic agility that go beyond some of the material in the book. But Evan, I would love to pause here and see if there are any good zingers, questions, concerns, comments, critiques, whatever it might be from the audience. We got anything good out there?
Yes, please type in your questions. They're starting to come in. We have one question about large organizations. Do you recommend that senior leaders, even the CEO, be actively involved in these kind of test and learn experiments, and why?
I think it is not only something that is nice, I think it is an absolute imperative, particularly if you're going into a new market or new market area. And the reason why it's such an imperative is the senior leader doesn't have intuition to make a good decision because they didn't grow up in that business. They didn't spend 20 years in that business. It's all new to them. So if they don't have firsthand experience, their default answer to the project team will always be, go and study more. When you're actually in the field, you're touching the experiment, you're living in the first mile, you get that intuition. You see things you didn't expect, and that's what drives you in new and different directions. Those of you who know and love Innsight's content will know that one of the case studies we love to talk about is some work we did with Manila Water to help them think about new service models they might launch. Ferds de la Cruz, who is leading a lot of those efforts, top number 2 guy in the organization, didn't lean back to watch some of the experiments that they were doing related to packaged water and other things. He was in the field. He was at the manufacturing facility. He was going on delivery runs, an absolute necessity if you're going to get that intuition to make good decisions.
That's great. We have a question from Himanshu who asks, what impedes strategic agility from a leadership behavior point of view? What kind of behaviors slow it down or stop it?
Yeah, this is something that we'll, I think, talk about in a lot of different ways as we get to the next couple of chunks of content, if the audience picks the areas that I expect they'll pick to talk about a little bit more. And for those of you who are half asleep or enjoying lunch at the moment, we are going to have a poll question in just a couple minutes, so you'll want to make sure you shake the dust off your eyelids and get ready to participate in the poll. I think the biggest thing that you need from a leader is just a desire to learn. I think you need to have a basic curiosity, a basic inquisitiveness, where you don't know the answer and you accept that. You say, what happens if we do this? What if we try this? I see this thing I didn't expect. This is something, unfortunately, we unlearn inside large organizations. The whole point of running a large organization is you want to remove variance. You want Six Sigma excellence. You want things to operate with precision. But it's the anomalies, it's the surprises, it's the left turns that are the true big I innovations. So if a leader wants to inject agility into their business, they have to consistently role model that love of learning, that curiosity, or the default operating system in the organization will crush them.
Great. We have a question from Carl Gustafson who says, looking at your 2 lessons of deft and hope, how do they work together? Is there an example that can be shared about how they actually interweave and work together?
Absolutely. So sometimes I will present the words going on top of each other because they are very clearly interrelated concepts. Deft is the overall process. Hope is the discipline that you bring to the T, to the testing part of the process. So you document, you evaluate, you focus, and you test. And when you test, you make sure you've got a hypothesis, you have objectives, you make predictions, and you execute in a way where you can test and measure those predictions. So I've talked about Manila Water before. One of the ideas that they were playing around with, we were playing around with, was something that would bring higher quality packaged water to Metro Manila. You see, the pipes that run into your house in Manila that carry Manila Water's water, that water, international standards of cleanliness, taste, turbidity, and so on. But the actual pipes inside your house, Manila Water has no control over. So sometimes you turn the tap, the water that comes out is dirty or doesn't taste so well, etc. Not Manila Water's fault, it's just the way it is. So a range of customers in Manila will go to what are known as water refilling stations. Someone has found a good meter, they've run Manila water into a bottle, run it through an ionizer, which does nothing, and then sold it at a 500 to 1,000% markup. Manila Water said, well, we can do this better than anyone in the market can do it, so we're going to come up with an idea. They go through the DEF process and begin to identify there are some really critical assumptions behind this related to the ability to scale, related to some of the questions about distribution, related to some of the branding elements of it. Each of those key assumptions then turns into a very specific task that has a precise hypothesis, objective, prediction, execution plan, and timeline so that they can, with discipline, learn as quickly as possible about the idea. They run the first commercial test related to this about 16 months ago now. They get into early scale commercialization about 6 months after that, and they're now beginning to roll the business out under the brand Healthy Family in Metro Manila. So what this allowed them to do is move much faster because they were much more focused on the key assumptions. So hopefully that helps show the tie between these two. Maybe one more question.
One more. Actually, two that are related. Laura asked, how much prototyping is enough? And Raha asks, what are the key points a launch leader can make to counter the pushback from senior leaders who might say, why do we need a controlled release or a limited market release of a new product?
This is one of the hardest and trickiest areas, both hard and tricky. So if we double click on one of the next topics, which is decision making under uncertainty, I'll provide some deeper guidance around this. But the thing I will say about the decision making, when do you stop prototyping, when do you start to really scale up, is it is a mix, a very clear mix of art and science. The biggest suggestion that I would offer you is really use that first mile certainty table and ask yourself, what are the key assumptions that I'm not yet sure about in terms of whether I meet those magic 3 criteria? Because those are the things that ultimately determine, am I ready to stop prototyping and start scaling? The thing that I would argue to the second question about what do you say to push back to people who say just get on and do it, is you want to make sure you get things right. And this process that I'm describing here, which is very similar to a lot of elements in what Steve Blank would describe or Eric Ries would describe, it's the best mechanism I've seen to methodically knock off strategic uncertainty and accelerate the path to getting to a right idea. Remind them that every idea, every business ever created went through a process like this, and all you're trying to do is do it explicitly. If you look at large sample research done by the Startup Genome and others, they find the #1 root cause of startup companies failing is premature scaling. What we did at Village Laundry Service, before you're ready, before the business model is ready to cook, you press on the gas and you run straight into a brick wall. So if you remind people that this approach will actually get them to the right destination faster and more efficiently using resource, it helps to change the conversation a little bit. So Evan, a bunch of great questions there. We'll have another pause in just a little bit to get some more questions from the group. But Kristen, I wondered if we couldn't open up our poll here. We've got 4 different topics we could talk about. I don't have enough time to go through all 4 of them, so I'd love to hear from you. Which one of these 4 are you most interested in talking about? Decision making and uncertainty, mastering interfaces and transitions, the enabling leadership behaviors to really live and thrive in the first mile, and how you might shape the corporate culture so it's more conducive to this type of experimentation. Go and pick the one that you're most interested in talking about. I've even cast my own vote here. We'll wait for just a minute or so, get the collection of the audience here, and see which ones that we're going to talk about. All right, so we've got decision making in uncertainty, and we've got close in all other areas. I'm going to pick shaping the corporate culture, which were the 2 I was hoping you would say. So we've got the slide back on screen here. Our systems are amazingly working without a hitch. Thank you very much to our crack IT team led by Raj. Let's start with decision making in uncertainty. If I click on this little button here, it should go there, and there we go. So let's talk for a few minutes about this. I'll talk for a few minutes about shaping the corporate culture. If I've got a couple extra minutes, I'll spend a minute or 2 about leadership behaviors. I might not get there. It will be in the slides that get sent around along with the material related to this webinar. So you will have a record for that, but we'll talk on these 2 topics, answer some questions from the group, and then send them on their way. So decision making in uncertainty. This is, as I said before, perhaps the biggest challenge for leaders who are staring at innovation's first mile. I think the first thing you want to remind yourself is for any idea, there are 2 distinct phases in the life of that idea. I mentioned Steve Blank before, a name that I am sure is known to most of you, the guy who really kicked off this line of thinking that led to Eric Ries writing The Lean Startup, who reminds us of what a startup actually is. A startup is not a small version of a large business. A startup is a temporary organization searching for a scalable and repeatable business model. So there's one period in the life of an idea when you're in search mode, where you're trying experiments, you know a little, you're assuming a lot, you try something, you adjust based on the experiment, you course correct, you move on. At some point, everything clicks together. You match or pass those magic 3 tests. The customers love what you're doing, you can deliver it reliably, you at least know how you can make money. Even if you haven't actually delivered a profitable business model, you know how to do it. That's when you've got to flip. You're out of search mode and you have to go into scale mode where you go and execute against the business. Now, very rarely does this process happen smoothly, does this process happen seamlessly. What is much more likely is you find yourself lost in what we call the fog of innovation. Everything's looking okay, some things are good, some things are bad. You're telling people study more, study more, study more, study more, and eventually they get completely lost and move sideways. At some point, some of these well-intentioned projects ultimately turn into the bane of innovation leaders everywhere, what we call the zombie project, the walking undead, the projects that if you are honest about it, will not materially move the growth needle, but still, they shuffle and linger on, sucking up all the innovation capacity inside the organization. So you need to make sure that you don't get trapped in this fog of innovation. You've got to make decisions at the right pacing, and sometimes you have to make the very tough decision to shut something down. So let me describe a few of the best practices that we see in this area. First, how do you make good decisions in uncertainty? There are 5 things that we suggest that you draw on to make good decisions when answers aren't 100% clear. The first is try to make this as unemotional as possible. There's lots of wiggle room when you're making these decisions. The more you set the criteria up front, the more you say, this is what we predict will happen for this test. If this doesn't happen, we got a real discussion we have to have. The clearer you are about that up front, the easier the discussion is. Make sure when you're having that discussion about what to do, it isn't just the people who came up with the idea. If you've got a vested stake in something, if you were there in the moment of conception, it is impossible to be unbiased about it. I've got 3 children. You saw one of them earlier here. In my eyes, they are the 3 most beautiful children in the world. It takes an outsider to say, you know what? Charlie's ears are just a little bit funny looking. And of course, that's true of other people's kids. My kids are just perfect. You need those outsiders that can say and bring truth to the discussion. It's very easy, particularly inside large companies, to never make a decision. This is not a challenge inside a startup because a startup has a very real constraint. The bank balance is dwindling, which forces them to go and make course corrections and make decisions. If you're inside a large company, impose a constraint, whether it's the calendar or some other thing, to make sure that you're making a decision. Never consider an idea in isolation, because if you're looking at any one thing and you've got some resources, you will always come up with an argument for why you should keep doing it. If you're inside an organization, you want to think about opportunity costs and all the other things you might be able to do. Finally, consider all of the alternatives that you have in front of you. That might be everything looks great, we're out of search mode, we're going to go and scale the business. It might be things are looking pretty good, but I still have some key uncertainties, I'm going to keep exploring. It might be I still believe, but we need to execute what Silicon Valley would call a pivot. We have to move in a dramatically different direction. And it might be, despite us doing the right things, despite us following the right approaches, despite the hypotheses being robust in the beginning, it just turned out an assumption was wrong and we ought to shut the project down. We ought to kill it. This is the most critical decision that you'll make, particularly inside a company where you're doing this again and again and again. It's a difficult decision to make because we never like admitting that we seem to have failed. I think at this stage, it's really important to remember that not all failures are created equal. As Jules Verne, the author of 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, said, science, my lad, is made up of mistakes, but they are mistakes that it is useful to make because they lead little by little to the truth. Sometimes a mistake, something that didn't work, is a critical enabler of future success. Now, at the same time, one of the things that I just think is crazy is people say we should fail more, we should embrace failure. That's a dumb idea. You don't want to fail more. You don't want to embrace failure. In many circumstances, failure is a really bad thing because sometimes we fail because we were stupid. We missed things that were blindingly obvious. The AOL-Time Warner merger was a bad idea. Everybody knew it at the time. This was just a dumb thought from the beginning. This is not a good failure. Sometimes we were sloppy and we executed poorly or imprecisely. This is Bill Buckner, 1986. Sorry for any Boston Red Sox fans out there. The last couple of decades, thankfully, have been better. If we had the right training, if we had the right player on the field, this doesn't happen. We should not encourage this at all. Sometimes we haven't trained enough or we don't have the right skills to do it. If I put my 7-year-old daughter, Holly, this is not her, this is a stock image, but if I put my 7-year-old daughter, Holly, behind the wheel of a car and she crashed it, we shouldn't celebrate and say this is great that Holly did it. This is a dumb thing that we shouldn't encourage. It's the wind tunnel types of failure where we run a well-disciplined, well-thought-out experiment that didn't work out. Those are good things. We should celebrate them, capture learning from them, and move on. But the first three categories, please, please don't encourage these things. So then if you make the decision that you've done the right things, you're going to shut a project down, what do you do next? Rita McGrath is a certified zombie killer. By day and by night, she teaches at Columbia University, who in our eyes offers the best guidance on this topic. From McGrath's research and writing and from some of our own field work, we've come up with the 4 C's of successfully disengaging from an idea. The first one is to recognize something good has happened. You have learned something useful. Make sure you codify and capture that learning. Celebrate the fact that a good outcome happened. Make sure you communicate that as widely as possible, or else no one's ever going to let you know of problems and ideas in the future. And finally, provide closure. This might be a wake, it might be a memorial, it might be a celebration, whatever. You're letting people know that you're done. You're not working on this anymore. I think a great example of a company that's good at doing this is the Finnish gaming company Supercell. All the time they've got development teams that are working on new ideas. Sometimes they succeed. They successfully launch a new game, it gets onto the App Store, whatever. Everybody stops, everybody cheers, everybody has a beer, it's a great moment. Sometimes they fail. A game is never going to make it into the App Store, they're going to stop it, they're going to shut it down. Everybody stops, everybody cheers, everybody breaks open champagne. Think about what this is like. This signals to the organization that good things have happened. It shows that they're willing to push boundaries, and most critically, it shows that they're done. They're not going to work on this idea anymore. In fact, it was a failed development team that picked itself up, took the punch from Tyson, reassembled, that then went on to launch the massively successful game Clash of Clans. Think about how you can do this inside your organization. Again, don't celebrate sloppiness, don't celebrate stupidity, don't celebrate a lack of skills, but celebrate when you take well thought out risks that simply don't pan out. So that's some of the thinking we have about making decisions under uncertainty. The other topic that you said you wanted to hear a few thoughts about is how you shape the corporate culture. So let me share a few thoughts there, and then I think we'll be at a stage where we'll get to the second Q&A. We'll see how long this takes. I might be able to give you a bonus third topic, we'll say. So how do you shape the corporate culture to make it conducive to all of the experimentation, all of the uncertainty, all of the different things we've talked about? This is a real challenge inside organizations. I want to get a sense from this audience about what it's like inside your organization by having you run another, or having you answer another poll question. If you were to pick one of the words here to describe the innovation environment inside your organization, which word would you pick? Is it hostile, where antibodies are fighting against innovation? Is it indifferent, where it happens if you actively push it? Does it actually encourage innovation? It's a struggle, but you're committed to it. Or does your environment actually enable or propel your innovation efforts? Kristen, can you open up the poll question and we can see what the audience thinks? What is it like inside your organization? Pick a word here, click on the submit button, and let's see what this group looks like. All right, we have some people, at least who are honest. I ran this poll question a couple weeks ago, and 0 people said hostile. I said, come on, you guys are kidding yourself. Now that we're behind a little veil of anonymity on a webinar, we're able to be a little bit more honest about it. 70% of you said hostile or indifferent. And I think this fits very much with our field experience, where yes, you do have some organizations that truly have a culture of innovation that encourage, enable, really makes this happen. But in most cases, at best, it requires active leadership attention. So Kristen, let's go back to the slides here and we'll talk a little bit about why this is and what we can do about it. So this is the way that I have come to frame the basic problem here. Let's see if I can get this little thing to disappear here. Oops. There we go. This is the way that I've come to frame the basic problem here. It's what I call the Pritchard predictability problem. The person pictured here, that's a lot of P's for this time of day. The person pictured here is Mark Pritchard. He's the head of brand for Procter & Gamble. Procter & Gamble called us up about a decade ago with a problem. They said that we need to get better at innovation. You look back about a decade ago and you say, I wouldn't expect you to call with this problem because the company was seemingly firing on all cylinders. They were executing well in their core business. They had just launched some new category creators like Febreze and White Strips and Swiffer. Their stock price had doubled. Revenues were surging. Everything looked good. But as P&G peered into its future, not 1 or 2 years out, but in some cases 20 years out, some executives got worried because they looked in their pipeline and they saw a lot of incremental innovations, a lot of line extensions. They didn't see the category creators. So we were talking with them about the challenge. We ultimately did a whole set of interventions with them, which led to another stream that we talk about another time called the Growth Factory. But we were talking to them about it, and I think the way that Mark framed the problem was the clearest explanation I heard. He said, at P&G, we are organized to deliver consistent, reliable results. We are a perfectly predictable company, and that is exactly the problem. Why is perfect predictability a problem? Well, almost every breakthrough in business or science has twists, turns, unpredictability, things that you didn't expect. And when you are organized to deliver consistent, reliable, predictable results, you can miss some of the biggest ideas. Here are 3 very quick examples of this. I bet you that many of you have not heard of the company on the upper left part of your screen, Audio, a company founded to discover, create, and subscribe to original audio content for your iPod. You haven't heard of this company because the company failed. There was about 2 weeks of life left when the founder recognized it was on death's door. He said, give me a new idea, anything at all. Had everybody break into small teams to come up with ideas that might be totally disconnected from the business, but would give them a second lease on life. One of the teams came up with an interesting and totally disconnected idea where people could post status messages that had intentional constraints. They were no longer than 140 characters. Yes, this was Twitter. No one set out to found Twitter. It was an accidental side project of a company that was going down the tubes. What you see pictured next to the little Twitter bird here is a drug that Pfizer was working on about 15 years ago, UK 95482. It was designed to lower blood pressure. It didn't work. There was, however, a side effect from the drug that led particularly male patients to come back and keep asking for more of it. This was Viagra. Pfizer studied the side effect, embraced it, and created a multi-billion-dollar product. The bottom part of the screen shows Alexander Fleming's laboratory. He doesn't clean it all that well. One August, when he leaves on vacation, he comes back, he sees something that he doesn't expect, and the world is given penicillin. In a perfectly predictable company, you don't have side projects. You don't study side effects, and certainly you make sure your laboratory is clean. And because of that, you miss some of the most exciting ideas. Despite that, the argument that we would make is that every company is brimming with innovation energy. The 3 pictures here look totally disconnected, but they actually show the same thing. The picture on top is an idyllic sunset at a beach. The picture in the middle is lunchtime at my kid Charlie's school in Singapore, where you have these discombobulated bodies running into each other as they try to play, depending on where you're from, soccer or football. And the picture at the bottom is a cubicle farm. In each case, there is significant energy. In the top picture, it's in the wind, it's in the water, it's in the sunlight. The energy is there, but capturing and harnessing it is a challenge. In the middle picture there, the innovation, the energy and capacity is there, but they need coaching, they need help to realize it. Inside your organization, the innovation capacity is there too. You just need to find a way to bring it out. As we thought about this problem, we've come to realize that if there's one thing you can do to try to realize and release the innate innovation capability in your organization, to really follow the behaviors consistent with first mile success, it's to remember the single word that goes along with true cultures of innovation. That word is curious. What I'm going to do, curiosity is in fact the word that's pictured here. Curious or curiosity are both acceptable. What I'm going to do to round out the content here in the next few minutes is describe how you can inject curiosity into the day-to-day in your organization. I'm then going to describe a set of systems that you can put in place to encourage and enable that curiosity, and then we'll open it up for a couple last questions before I provide some concluding remarks. What does a curious organization do? A curious organization is always trying to discover. That means it truly knows its customers, not as facts and figures on spreadsheets, but as living, breathing human beings. When was the last time you actually spent time with customers? Not to go and try to sell something to them or to ask them what they want, but just to know them a little bit better. Find a way to increase the amount of time you're spending with today's and tomorrow's customers. It will give you the spark that leads to innovation. The curious company takes idea road trips. I stole this term from the destroyer of my youth, Nolan Bushnell, who founded companies like Atari and Chuck E. Cheese. Whenever he was stuck on a problem, he would get in his car and go to a trade show in an industry that was completely disconnected from what he was thinking about to try to find the uncommon insight that would spur ideas for innovation. Bushnell recognized, as we get to the second category, that innovation magic always occurs at intersections where different mindsets, skills, and backgrounds collide. The curious company lives at these intersections. They're seeking ideas everywhere. They're running open innovation programs. They're running contests like the Netflix contest pictured here. They're crowdsourcing among their employees. When was the last time you asked your colleagues, what ideas do you have to go and innovate? Go and make a routine habit of looking for ideas wherever they might be. The curious organization collides internally. They don't live within silos. They don't live within geographies. Different groups come together to break the back of very tough problems. The curious organization also recognizes that every idea is partially right and partially wrong. So they make a regular habit of testing. They experiment regularly, sometimes with no purpose other than just to learn. The box that's pictured here is the Adobe Kickbox from the software company Adobe. If you get one of these Kickboxes and open it up, inside you see tools and templates galore related to testing. Even more critically, you find a prepaid debit card with $1,000 on it that you can spend without asking for anybody's approval. 1,000 people have received a Kickbox. That's $1 million of investment in experimentation, but that's 1,000 kites that otherwise would not have been flown. When was the last time you did it? Just ran an experiment to see what happened. You don't have to spend anything to do this. Take a different route into work. Shake up your morning routine. Find a way to consciously complicate your life and see what happens. Finally, the curious organization shares half-baked ideas. The picture underneath this is the founding team of Pixar, Ed Catmull and John Lasseter. Pixar is famous for showing rough cuts, showing early ideas of movies to the smartest people it can find. Catmull has created something called the Brain Trust that gets exposed to early ideas. As Catmull describes it, every movie Pixar has ever made at one point sucks. The goal is to move from suck to non-suck. If you're trying to sit on an idea and wait until it's perfect until you share it, you've missed all those great opportunities to learn. When was the last time you just drew something on a piece of paper and showed it to someone and said, here's what I'm thinking about, what do you think about it? Rough drafts are great and the best ways to learn. These are things that anyone can do. It can be part of your day-to-day routines, yet it's insufficient to really create a true culture of innovation, because innovation inside an organization is a system-level problem. When we try to solve a system-level problem by doing a thing, it doesn't work. You always want to think about connections. You want to make sure that you never ask for ideas without first saying, what problems or what ways are we going to process them? Don't ask for answers before you've thought about the problems worth solving. Don't ask for people to experiment if you're not going to give them a well-stocked laboratory. Don't tell people to take risks unless you're tolerant of the good kinds of failure we discussed. Don't say we want bold, disruptive ideas unless you're willing to put your very best resources on it. And don't expect you're going to get breakthroughs unless you're willing to take the A-team and put it against it. What this means is if you really are trying to encourage and shape your culture to enable what I'll call everyday innovation, where you really go and put this in the fabric of your organization. You want an enabling system to enhance and encourage that core of curiosity. It doesn't have to be massively complicated. You might want to have an idea supply chain where you make more routinized processes to go and get ideas. It could be an open innovation program. It could be a systematic approach to crowdsourcing, whatever it is. You've got a mechanism in place so the raw material keeps coming in. You want to arm people with checklists so they know when they're in the heat of the moment whether they're working on the right problem, whether they've got the right idea. We don't know everything about innovation, but we know a lot, and we can give people simple guides for how to do it better. You want to have the equivalent of the sorting hat from Harry Potter, which goes on top of any idea and says, this one we're never going to work on. This one goes to this group. This one you should just do it yourself to make sure the ideas are getting to the right places. You want to have enablers of experimentation. Your laboratory needs to be well stocked. You need to have laboratory space. You need a test bed to encourage people to try things. You need to train people on how to do this. Innovation is a discipline. It is a skill. We need to make sure that we teach people how to do it. And finally, you have to reinforce the love of learning at key ritual moments. What you see here is a team at Tata Sons, the largest conglomerate in India, winning a prize called the Dare to Try Prize. As the name connotes, this is a team that worked on something that failed, but they failed for the right reasons and they extracted learnings from it. If you don't dare to try, how could you possibly hope to succeed? This is a system. This isn't do one of these things. When you do these things in concert, along with everyday curiosity, this is when you begin to chip away at the culture of innovation. So those are some thoughts on the couple special topics that you wanted to hear a little bit more: decision-making in uncertainty and enabling a culture that makes first-mile behavior more natural. Evan, I think we've got time for maybe a couple final questions before I provide my concluding remarks.
Excellent. We have a question from Ayush who asks, what about the human element of innovation? How do you overcome decision-making paralyses such as groupthink and conflict within the team?
Never perfect, but a couple thoughts here. I think having outsiders or people unvested in ideas is the best way to break away from groupthink. The term devil's advocate has a bum rap in the innovation world, but it actually serves a very useful function. You should have somebody who makes the case for why you should kill or stop an idea. I think that's one thing. I think the second thing is, remember, the fewer the decision makers, the less likely you are to suffer from analysis paralysis. Venture capital companies, they have an individual champion for things they invest in, and they will say some of the best investments were the most polarizing ones. So allow dissension sometimes. And then finally, I would say really focus on the assumptions. The way you remove some of these elements is you say, what are the key assumptions we have to believe? Then you're not having a discussion about, well, is Evan smarter than Scott or Kristen or whatever? The assumptions and the experiments and the data that's generated from doing things, that makes the decision, because that doesn't lie. That's the result of a well thought out experiment.
Excellent. We have a question from Raghav who asks, the everyday innovation system, it seems like a daunting undertaking to introduce to the organization. Any pointers on how to get it started in bite-sized pieces?
So the first thing I would say is start with what you can individually do. So if you think about that core of curiosity, there is nothing that stops you as an individual, you as a team leader, from going out and spending more time with customers, from flying kites, from doing the everyday things that don't require anyone's approval. Go and do those things. Second, try to find the smallest place possible where you can go and pilot a collection of systems. The everyday systems described there were as light as they can possibly be. You're talking about, in many cases, very simple checklists, very simple guides, some very simple enablers of experimentation. They are things that we believe you can do in pretty short order without big investment. Number three, find somebody somewhere in the organization who's important that cares about these things. That exists in every organization. If it doesn't in yours and you're passionate about this topic, you might think about whether you're in the right organizational home, a topic perhaps for another day. How about one more, Evan?
Well, when it comes to killing zombie projects, how do you know that a key assumption is critical enough to shut it down and not just revector and pivot from there?
So there's never a perfect black, well, sometimes it's black and white. So if the regulator says you can't do that, okay. If the molecule doesn't work, then you're done. In most cases, it's very gray. So I think the best you can do is to be as clear as you can about what are the predictions you're making and how do you execute to measure them, and just hold true to what you've said, that if it's below this, we're going to do this. If it's above this, we're going to do this. And remember that idea of always comparing options. So the option isn't do this idea or don't do this idea. It's do this idea or take the resources working on it and put it on another idea, or go and start a completely different idea. And when you look at those different choices as comparisons, sometimes it makes clear, well, maybe there's something here. There sure is a lot more if we put extra attention here. Well, thanks for all the great questions, everyone. If I missed any great ones, Evan, we'll make sure that I get them and we'll include them in the webinar report. I wanted to leave you with just one final thought, or a collection of final thoughts. This is the way we define innovation, something different that creates value. By far, the most important word here is the first one, something. You can't go and create value unless you actually go and do something. The best present I ever got from a project team was this. This is the bobblehead doll affectionately known as Skoda. It was my head on the body of Yoda from the Star Wars movie. You can see there Yoda's tagline, there is no try or do not. The same is true for you in innovation. You cannot make it theoretical. You cannot make it abstract. If you want to succeed in the first mile, you want to create a culture of innovation, you have to go and do something. By analogy, when my oldest child, Charlie, who's now 9 years old, a couple years ago said he wanted to learn to ride a bike, what did we do? Did we go and watch YouTube videos of bike riding? Was a spreadsheet involved? Was a PowerPoint presentation involved? Did we discuss the theory of bike riding? No. Charlie got on a bike and began to pedal and fell down, and got back up and began to pedal until he figured out how to do it. Today, Charlie is a competent bike rider. He can get from point A to point B. Enough practice, he can be a proficient bike rider. Performance-enhancing drugs, and who knows, maybe the Tour de France is in his future. Don't use performance-enhancing drugs, they're bad. Innovation is like this. It is a discipline. It is a skill that we can master and manage. Even better, there are great accelerants out there. Great, some of which, many of which, and live in our work, that can give you a great starting point for innovation. So I'm going to leave you with 6 final words that I hope you remember from what we've talked about today. First, be humble. Recognize when you approach that first mile of innovation, you know a little and you're assuming a lot. To fight back against that, be thorough. Try to pick up your idea and look at it from as many different perspectives as you can. Be innovative. Think about how you can embrace your inner MacGyver. Try to find creative, clever ways to test your assumptions. Be active. Don't make this academic. Learn in the market, with the market, from the market. Be flexible. Every idea is partially right and partially wrong. When the kite crashes, nobody gets hurt. Figure out ways you can test without risking everything that you're trying to do. Finally, and most importantly, be bold. We got a lot of big problems in this world. We got to feed 10 billion people. We got to provide health care and education to hundreds of millions of people who can't access it. We got to deal with income inequality, climate change, and so on. We need our great companies. We need our great people to realize all the innovation potential that lies within, channel and harness it in the right way. I hope I've given you a few thoughts from this discussion about how to do this, so please go out and do something different that creates value. Thank you very much, and back over to Evan.
Well, thank you everyone for attending Innosight's webinar on boosting your company's strategic agility. Thank you to Scott. We're grateful for all your time and attention. You'll get an email when the recording of today's session is available to forward to your colleagues. And we welcome you to contact us at innosight.com. And also please follow Scott on Twitter at Scott D. Anthony and check out his regular posts at the Harvard Business Review website. Scott would also welcome hearing from you directly via the email address on the screen. So on behalf of Innosight, thank you very much for attending and enjoy the rest of the day.